There is a decision most people never make. It isn't a big decision. It doesn't come with a countdown, a stage, or a witness. Nobody films it. Nobody claps. Most of the time, not even you notice that it's happening. It shows up in the smallest possible moment. Usually when you're tired, usually when no one is watching, usually when looking away would be so much easier than looking at it directly. And here is the part that should sit heavy in your chest for a second. Whether or not you make this decision will quietly determine the entire shape of your life. Not your job title, not your bank balance, not the highlight reel you post for people who barely know you. The actual shape of your one, unrepeatable life. Most people are so busy chasing loud things, approval, applause, the next distraction, that they walk straight past the one decision that was actually going to change everything. They never even see it. It passes them like a stranger on a crowded street. Today, we stop. We look directly at it. We name it, and by the end of this video, you will know with total clarity whether you have already made this decision or whether it is still sitting in front of you right now, waiting. Let's begin. Think about how most lives actually unfold. Not the lives people perform for a camera, the real ones. The ones lived in kitchens, in cars, in waiting rooms, in the strange, heavy quiet of a Sunday night before another Monday. Most people don't fail loudly. There's no crash, no single dramatic rock bottom you could point to and say, that, right there, is where it went wrong. They just drift. They wake up and check a phone before they check in with themselves. They answer everyone else's urgency before they've asked what they actually want. They say, I'll start Monday. And Monday quietly becomes next month, and next month becomes next year, and next year becomes a soft, comfortable version of someday that never actually arrives because someday was never a date on a calendar. Someday is just where people go to hide from a decision. You know this pattern. You have lived inside it. Maybe you're living inside it right now. The membership that renews every month and gets used twice. The idea that's been almost ready to start for 3 years. The relationship you keep tolerating because ending it would require a conversation you don't want to have. The talent you have never trained because training it might mean discovering you were never as gifted as you hoped. And somehow that thought is more frightening than never trying at all. Most people are so busy chassinand underneath all of it. There's the quiet habit of measuring your unfinished life against everyone else's highlight reel. The friend who started the business, the stranger online, who already looks like the after picture, the classmate, who somehow figured it out first. You tell yourself you're behind. You are not behind. You simply haven't decided yet. Those are not the same thing, even though they feel identical at 2 in the morning. Here is the part that actually stings. Most people are not lazy. Most people are not stupid. Most people are not short on ability. What they are short on is a decision. They are waiting to feel ready. Waiting for confidence to arrive before commitment, waiting for certainty to arrive before action, waiting for some future version of themselves, smarter, braver, less exhausted, to show up and finally do the thing. That version isn't coming. He was never coming. She was never coming. Because that version of you isn't created by waiting. That version of you is created by a decision. One decision, made quietly, made privately, made without any proof that it will work. So let's talk about what that decision actually is. Every person who has ever built a life that mattered, every artist, every scientist, every athlete, every founder, every parent who raised something remarkable out of very little reached a moment where they stopped waiting for the right conditions and simply began. Not loudly, not publicly, privately, in a room with no one else in it. That is the silent decision. It is the decision to stop being something that things happen to, and to start being someone who happens to things. It is the decision to take full ownership of your one life right now without waiting for permission, without waiting for proof, without waiting to feel ready, because readiness is not a feeling that arrives on its own. It is a state you create by deciding. Notice what this decision is not. It is not a New Year's resolution announced to a room that will forget it by February. It is not a caption under a photo. It is not a declaration made for an audience. The moment it needs an audience to feel real, It was never a decision at all. It was a performance. The real decision happens in the dark. No one sees it. No one applauds. And yet everything changes at that exact instant, even if the outward proof of that change takes years to arrive. Ask anyone who has built something extraordinary to point to the moment it began, and most of them won't describe a stage. They'll describe an ordinary evening, a quiet room, a version of themselves finally done negotiating with their own excuses. So what actually happens inside a person in that moment? What changes underneath the surface that no camera could ever catch? Let's go deeper. There's an old idea, older than any single religion or philosophy, that shows up in nearly every wisdom tradition human beings have ever built. That inside you is a version of yourself more complete than the one you're currently living as. Not a fantasy version, not a highlight reel version, a truer one, the one underneath the noise, underneath the performance, underneath the fear, closing the distance between who you are and who that person already is. That's the entire task in front of you. And here is where most people misunderstand the whole process. They think closing that distance means adding credentials, adding followers, adding possessions, adding proof. So they spend their whole life piling things on top of themselves, hoping that somewhere under the pile, the real version will finally show up. It never does. That's not how this works. You're not a blank canvas waiting for paint. You're closer to a diamond still packed inside rock. Nothing extra needs to be added. What's excess just needs to be cleared away. The fear, the people pleasing, the doom scrolling, the comparison, the resentment, the endless, exhausting performance for people who were never watching that closely to begin with. You don't build this version of yourself from scratch. You clear away what's been sitting on top of it for years. This is why so much self-improvement quietly fails before it even starts. It keeps adding another course, another morning routine, another 5-step system, another book that says the same thing a different way onto a person who was never actually missing information in the first place. Nobody has ever become themselves by collecting one more thing. They became themselves the day they finally set something down. Which brings us to the real enemy, and it isn't the one you think. It isn't failure. Failure is loud. Failure gets your attention. Failure practically forces you to change. The real enemy is comfort. Comfort doesn't feel like danger. That's exactly what makes it dangerous. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a warning label. It just feels like an ordinary Tuesday. It feels like rest. It feels, in the moment, completely reasonable. Your nervous system is wired for this, and it isn't your fault. For 200,000 years, comfort meant survival, and discomfort meant a predator, a famine, a real threat. That old software is still running underneath you right now. It still treats a hard conversation, a cold morning, a blank page, or an uncertain future like something that might actually kill you. But you're not being hunted anymore. For most people watching this, survival isn't the daily struggle it was for every generation before you, which means the exact mechanism that kept your ancestors alive is now, quietly, the mechanism keeping you small. It shows up in small, deniable ways. The snooze button pressed twice. 15 minutes of scrolling that turns into an hour without you noticing. The "I'll deal with it tomorrow" that slowly hardens into a personality trait. None of it looks like danger in the moment. That's the entire trick. And every time you give in, you're not really resting. You're drifting a little further from the person you said you wanted to become. Here's what almost nobody tells you. The people who became extraordinary wrestled with that exact same resistance on more mornings than you'd ever guess. The difference was never that they didn't feel it. The difference is that they had already decided who they were before their feelings ever got a vote. That's the real secret hiding inside the silent decision. It isn't motivation. Motivation is a mood. It shows up when it wants to and leaves when it wants to. And if your entire future depends on it showing up on schedule, you've built that future on ground that was never stable to begin with. Motivation asks how you feel this morning. Identity doesn't ask anything. It already knows the answer, because the answer was settled the day you decided who you were going to be. Decide who you are once, all the way down to the floor of yourself. And your actions start following without needing your permission every single morning. You stop negotiating with a version of yourself that was built biologically to talk you out of growth. You simply act, because that is what someone like you does. That's the real machinery behind every disciplined person you've ever admired. Not superhuman motivation, a settled identity that no longer needs convincing. So how do you actually build this into a life? Not a mood, not a moment, a life. Here are the principles. 6 of them. Learn them once, return to them forever. First, decide before you're ready. Readiness is a myth people invented to make delay feel responsible. Nobody ever felt fully ready to start a company, end a relationship, move to a new city, or stand on a stage for the first time. You're not actually waiting for readiness. You're waiting for permission from a version of yourself that doesn't exist yet. Stop waiting for someone who isn't there. Decide as the person you already are. Second, decide in private. The moment your decision needs an audience to feel real is the moment it stops being a decision and becomes a performance for other people's approval. And approval is a currency that runs out the instant the applause stops. Make the decision where no one can see it. Let your results months later be the only announcement anyone ever hears. Third, decide against comfort. On purpose. You will not accidentally become disciplined. You have to build small, deliberate friction into your days. The early start, the hard conversation, the workout. You don't feel like doing the message you've been avoiding for weeks. Not because discomfort is magic, because choosing it on purpose is how you prove the decision is real to the only person who actually needs convincing, yourself. Fourth, decide your identity before your outcome. If your commitment depends on results arriving quickly, you'll quit in the very first stretch where results are slow. And results are almost always slow at first. Anchor the decision to who you're becoming, not to what you're about to receive. I am becoming someone who trains every day, survives a bad week. I want 6 months of visible progress, usually doesn't. Fifth, decide your inputs before you decide your effort. You cannot hustle a bad environment. The people around you, the information you consume, the rooms you spend your time in, none of that is background noise to your life. It's the raw material your life gets built from. Feed your mind mediocrity, and it will manufacture mediocrity, no matter how hard you push. Surround yourself with people whose standards are inconveniently high. Sixth, decide again tomorrow. This is the one nobody wants to hear. You don't get to make this decision once and coast on the memory of it. It isn't a monument you build one time and visit whenever you feel nostalgic. It's a door you walk back through every single morning, whether you feel like it or not, for as long as you're alive. The people who look consistent from the outside are simply the ones who kept redeciding on the days it would have been easier to quit. 6 principles. One decision made over and over for as long as you're breathing. Now let's look at what this actually produces. Because you don't have to take any of this on faith. History already ran the experiment. Over and over for thousands of years. Look at Kobe Bryant, who was in gyms before sunrise, long before anyone was watching. Long before there was any proof it would ever turn into 5 championships. Nobody forced him there. He decided privately, on ordinary mornings, nobody filmed. And the trophies simply arrived later as evidence of a decision that had already been made. Look at Nikola Tesla, who helped hand the modern world alternating current. The foundation of the electrical grid you're almost certainly using to watch this video right now, and who still died broke and mostly alone in a rented hotel room, at a time when the public had largely stopped paying attention to him at all. He wasn't chasing the reward. For most of his life, the reward simply never came. He was chasing something he'd already decided, long before there was any recognition around to justify it. Look at Marie Curie, who carried radioactive material in her coat pockets because the danger wasn't fully understood yet, who kept working straight through illness her own research almost certainly caused, and who became the first person in history to win a Nobel Prize in 2 different sciences. Her notebooks are still radioactive today. That isn't a metaphor. That's what full commitment can look like. Physically, in the real world, look at Alexander the Great, who built one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen before. He turned 30, and who, as the story has been told for over 2,000 years, wept when he ran out of new land to conquer. He wasn't crying from weakness. He was crying because a mind trained only to move forward has no idea what to do with an ending. Look at Thomas Edison, who burned through thousands of failed attempts before the light bulb finally held, and who is famous for insisting he hadn't failed at all. He'd simply found thousands of ways that didn't work. That single reframe repeated privately to himself on the worst days, in a lab almost nobody ever saw, might be a bigger invention than the light bulb itself. And it isn't only the distant past. Look at Michael Jordan, left off his high school varsity basketball team as a sophomore, who has said that single humiliating afternoon quietly fueled decades of work almost nobody witnessed. Look at a young writer named J.K. Rowling, turned down by roughly a dozen publishers before anyone said yes to a story about a boy wizard. Writing pages in calf S while most of the industry had already moved on. None of them are remembered for what the world handed them. They're remembered for what they refused to keep waiting for. That's the pattern. Every time, no exceptions. Different centuries, different fields, different obstacles entirely. And yet the mechanism underneath every one of them is identical. A private decision made long before there was any external reason to believe it would work. Sustained by nothing but the person's own refusal to stay where they were. Now let's talk about something most people avoid discussing honestly. Time. You don't actually lack time, you lack a decision about where it goes. There are 168 hours in a week. Everyone gets exactly the same number. You, your favorite athlete, the busiest founder you follow online, the person you admire most in the world, nobody gets 169. Subtract 56 hours for a generous 8 hours of sleep a night. You have 112 left. Subtract another 50 for work and commuting. Even on the demanding weeks, you still have 62 hours of discretionary time every single week that belong entirely to you. 62 hours. What did you actually do with them last week? Most people can't answer that question with any real precision, and that, quietly, is exactly why most people never make the decision at all. You can't direct what you refuse to measure. The people who build extraordinary lives track their hours with something close to reverence, not out of anxiety, but out of respect for how limited and non-renewable this particular resource actually is. Every single hour is either an investment in who you're becoming or a withdrawal from it. There's no third option sitting quietly in the middle. Next, choose your arena. This is where most ambitious people quietly sabotage themselves. They try to be great at everything, which is really just another way of ending up great at nothing. There's no such thing as generally extraordinary. You're not trying to become remarkable in every direction at once. You're trying to become remarkable at one thing, chosen on purpose, pursued with a depth most people are too scattered to ever reach. Every real yes quietly costs you 100 no's you'll never announce. Choosing a direction always feels like a small loss because it is one, and that loss isn't a flaw in the process. It's the actual shape of the process. Depth requires narrowing. There's no version of this that skips that part. And finally, guard your inputs. Your mind manufactures whatever you keep feeding it. That isn't a nice metaphor. It's closer to biology than poetry. The pathways in your brain are physically shaped by what you repeatedly expose them to. Fill your days with mediocre conversations, mediocre content, mediocre ambitions dressed up as realism, and your mind will manufacture exactly that, on schedule. Whether you meant for it to or not, choose your inputs, the way you choose the water you drink. Study the people who took their field further than anyone before them. Spend real time near people whose standards make you a little uncomfortable. What you allow into your mind isn't decoration around the edges of your life. It's what your life actually gets built out of. Now, the part most people avoid, because it's the part that quietly decides everything. Failure. Every meaningful achievement in recorded history was preceded by failure that would have ended most people's attempt completely. Not occasional failure. Repeated, humiliating, expensive failure. The light bulb, the vaccine, the novel that finally sold. The company that finally worked. All of it sits on top of a graveyard of earlier attempts that didn't. Failure isn't the opposite of the decision. Failure is what the decision looks like while it's still in progress. The question after a setback was never supposed to be, should I stop? That question only sounds reasonable because pain has a way of dressing itself up as wisdom. The real question is smaller, quieter, and far more useful. What does this failure now know that I didn't know an hour ago? Treat failure as a verdict, and eventually it will talk you into quitting. Treat it as data, and it becomes almost impossible to stop you, because you've taken away its power to end the story. All it can do now is inform the next attempt. This is where time frame becomes everything. Most people think in weeks. The people who build extraordinary lives think in decades. When your time frame is short, every setback feels catastrophic, because you're measuring a marathon with a stopwatch built for a sprint. You quit the moment progress slows because slowness feels like proof you chose wrong. You abandon the arena the second it gets genuinely difficult, because difficulty was never supposed to happen to the right decision, or so a short time frame keeps insisting quietly and wrongly in your ear. But stretch your time frame out to 10 years, 20 years, further than you can currently see, and something in you shifts. A bad week stops being a crisis. A slow month stops being a verdict. You become almost calm in the face of obstacles that would flatten someone thinking in days, because you can already see past them. Out toward a horizon most people never even bother looking for. Ask yourself the question that actually matters. Zoom out 20 years. Does today even show up in that story? If nothing comes to mind, that's not a small problem. That's the real problem. The one quietly sitting underneath every smaller complaint you've ever had about your own life. And here, finally, is the deepest truth in all of this. The one that nearly every serious tradition of thought eventually arrives at, from wildly different centuries and wildly different corners of the world, all pointing at the exact same thing. The becoming is the reward, not the applause that might come later, not the money, not the headline, the plaque, the follower count, or how any of it looks from the outside. The daily act of stretching a little past who you were yesterday. That's the actual prize. Everything else is just a side effect that occasionally shows up, and just as often doesn't. Every achievement eventually fades. Every headline gets replaced by tomorrow's headline. Every empire, every record, every viral moment eventually dissolves into a footnote almost nobody reads. But the felt experience of being fully alive, of burning cleanly towards something that actually matters to you, that doesn't fade the same way because it was never dependent on anyone else noticing it in the first place. So here's where all of this actually lands. The question was never, can you become extraordinary? Everyone watching this has that raw capacity somewhere inside them. That part was decided the moment you were born a human being with a working mind and a finite number of days. The real question is smaller and far more uncomfortable. Will you make the decision? Will you pay the price nobody claps for? Will you sit with the doubt, the solitude, the slow invisible years before anything visible happens? Will you keep choosing it on the ordinary Tuesday when there's no crowd, no deadline, and no one who would even notice if you quietly gave up? This isn't a decision with a finish line. It shows up disguised as small, unremarkable moments. Hitting snooze, closing the laptop early, telling yourself you'll deal with it later. And every one of those moments is really just the same decision, quietly asking to be made again. Some days you'll make it and barely notice you did. Other days it will feel like the hardest thing you've ever done. Either way, the direction of your entire future gets decided in these small, unremarkable moments. Nobody else will ever see. Every day moves you 1 inch closer to the person you're capable of becoming. or 1 inch further away. Neutral was never actually on the table. It just felt like it was, so decide. Not tomorrow, not once you feel ready, not once the conditions are perfect, because they were never going to be perfect. Perfect was never actually on the table either. Decide today, quietly, privately, in whatever room you happen to be sitting in right now, with no one watching and no applause coming. Nobody is coming to make this decision for you. Not a mentor, not a partner, not a better year, not a more convenient Monday, not some future version of you who finally has enough time. It was always going to be you. In some unremarkable moment, nobody else will ever know about. Simply choosing. That's exactly how every extraordinary life you've ever admired actually began. Not with a stage, with a silent decision made by an ordinary person on an ordinary day who simply refused to stay the same for 1 more year. If this reached you the way I think it did, don't let it stop here. Subscribe, because there's more of this coming. And this channel exists for people who are done waiting for permission. Drop a comment and tell me the decision you're finally making today. Say it once, even just in a comment section, because writing it down is often the first real proof, even to yourself, that you actually mean it. Send this to the one person you know who's standing exactly where you used to stand. The decision is right in front of you. It always was. Make it.